Abuse prevention. The U.S. Bishops' Conference unveils its plan to stop clergy sexual misconduct. Waiting for testimony. Why lawmakers think they will know by tomorrow if the woman accusing Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh will testify on Capitol Hill. Defending Francis. What Pope Emeritus Benedict is saying about his successor. We'll have a report from Rome. And witnesses of the love of God. Why thousands of Hispanic Catholics are headed to Texas this week. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, September 20th, 2018.
Many of our people and our priests are calling it the summer of hell.
Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York launches a new investigation after a summer that saw former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick and 301 Pennsylvania priests accused of child sex abuse. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. In a bold move, Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York is appointing a former federal judge to investigate procedures and protocols for his archdiocese. He hopes to restore faith of those who are disillusioned by how the church has handled sexual abuse allegations. Correspondent Jason Calvi reports from outside the U.S. Bishops' Conference headquarters. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Cardinal Dolan says many Catholics are let down and beginning to lose trust in the U.S. bishops. He's announcing a full investigation into his archdiocesan records and personnel. Barbara Jones, who left the Manhattan federal bench in 2013, will be at the helm.
The Cardinal has told me to leave no stone unturned.
New York's Cardinal Dolan names retired Judge Barbara Jones to investigate how the Archdiocese has handled sex abuse cases.
I'm afraid many don't believe me. So I'm asking you, please, to conduct an independent, scrupulous review to see if indeed there are gaps, if there are things we should be doing and are not.
The Archdiocese of New York is the second largest in the country, with 2.6 million Catholics. After the sex scandal of 2002 that centered on Boston, Dolan says the U.S. bishops fixed many problems, but not all.
Bishops need the same accountability and the same oversight as they're supposed to give to priests in two areas: when they themselves have committed immoral abuse, or when they've been negligent in acting upon cases that they get.
Catholics were shocked this June when the Archdiocese of New York found an allegation of child sex abuse against Theodore McCarrick credible. Last week, leaders of the U.S. bishops met here in Washington. And yesterday, the conference revealed their strategy. It includes a hotline to report complaints of abuse and harassment by bishops, and support for a full investigation into Archbishop McCarrick's sexual misconduct. Dolan says the faithful deserve answers.
How could a man continue to rise in the church with a background like that? And that's a darn good question that I share. We have got to get to the bottom of that.
Now, New York's Attorney General is also investigating clergy sexual abuse. On the national level, the bishops from around the country will be gathering in Baltimore this November for high-stakes debates on their next steps. Now, conservative Catholic Michael Hitchborn of the Lepanto Institute says the Bishops' Conference recommendations from yesterday are a good first step, but an attorney representing Boston clergy sex abuse victims says the statement from the Bishops' Conference was insincere. Lauren?
Correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. Clergy sex abuse victims in New Jersey who were required to keep quiet by settlement agreements can now speak publicly about their ordeals. The state's Catholic Conference says it has no objection to victims speaking out. Prior to 2002, compensation agreements often did not allow survivors to talk about their claims. A deadline is looming for Supreme Court nominee Judge Brett Kavanaugh's accuser to agree to testify. Or Republicans say they will forge ahead with a committee vote on his nomination. But the woman accusing him of a sexual attack in the 1980s says she is receiving death threats, and her lawyer wants lawmakers to agree to terms that are fair and which ensure her safety. Senator Mazie Hirono and Kirsten Gillibrand, both Democrats, presented a letter signed by more than 1,000 alumna of the Holton Arms School, located just outside of Washington, D.C. And that's where Kavanaugh's accuser, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, was a student at the time of the alleged incident. They support her and want Ford to have time to make her case.
The American people need to see Dr. Ford side by side with Judge Kavanaugh and judge for themselves. But if she changes her mind again and says, I'll only do it in private hearing, I'll reluctantly agree to that.
Republican Chuck Grassley, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, tells Ford's attorney she has until 10 a.m. Friday to submit a biography and a prepared statement if she intends to testify. Joining me now to talk about the impact of the sexual abuse allegations against Judge Kavanaugh in the midterm elections is Julie Grace Brufke, Capitol Hill reporter for The Hill. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about this. Dr. Ford has said she does want to testify, and we're waiting. Yes. Do things shift if she doesn't appear to testify? Do they shift in Judge Kavanaugh's favor or not?
Now, I think it's all going to kind of hinge on how Judge Kavanaugh's testimony goes and what that line of questioning looks like. I think it'll also hinge on whether or not her testimony is public. If she goes out and there's kind of like a harsh rhetoric coming from Republicans, it could backfire on them in the long run.
College-educated women are a key demographic in midterm elections. So how do you think that this controversy is resonating with female voters in the midterms? Have you had a chance to talk to them?
No, we've seen with polling, Judge Kavanaugh's popularity has dipped. I think the same demographic that's kind of the center-right to independent voters, female suburban educated women that are kind of bothered by the Trump tweets, is a similar thing where it could prove to be problematic for them.
If this confirmation proceeds to a vote before the full Senate, as we believe it will, how do these assault allegations change the dynamic when it comes to how Democrats and Republicans, not just women, will vote ahead of the midterms?
I think, once again, it's going to hinge a lot on the testimony and what comes out of it, what comes forth from an investigation. I think Senators Murkowski and Collins are probably the two to watch on whether or not he does get confirmed. I think ultimately, if the vote does happen, he probably will, but a lot will hinge on next week.
Thank you so much for joining us, Julie Grace Brufke. We appreciate your time. A top White House official defends Judge Kavanaugh. Mercedes Schlapp, director of strategic communications and a Catholic, tells our White House correspondent Mark Irons it's not the White House's decision to move tomorrow's 10 a.m. deadline.
Well, this is not our decision. At the end of the day, it's the Senate Judiciary Committee who runs this process, and they've made it very clear that they are going to move forward with a hearing on Monday. So that is really up to the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Mark also asked Schlapp whether the charges against Kavanaugh are disqualifying.
What I can tell you is Judge Kavanaugh, as he has said numerous times, and as he said consistently, is that he's denied this horrific accusation. It's very clear that his story has been very consistent. On the other hand, the accuser's story has not been.
We will hear more from Mercedes Schlapp tomorrow on the show, including whether the president will sign a spending bill that includes funding for Planned Parenthood. 3 judges in Paraguay are suspended after giving a priest convicted of sexual abuse a light sentence. Father Felix Miranda was found guilty of abusing a 14-year-old. He was given a suspended 2-year jail sentence and an $800 fine. A complaint against the judge was filed by a prosecutor. Church officials are also investigating the case. Ireland officially repeals the 8th Amendment to its constitution, which provided legal protection for the unborn. In a referendum in May, voters overwhelmingly said they wanted to remove the ban on abortion. Legislation will be introduced next month to allow abortion in the Catholic country during the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. At least 21 people are dead following a massive landslide in the Philippines. The disaster buried dozens of homes. Rescuers are scrambling to find survivors. They say they have received text messages pleading for help. A German newspaper is quoting a letter allegedly written by Benedict XVI. In it, the retired pope hits back at criticism of his resignation in 2013. And the New York Times says that Benedict is telling critics of Pope Francis to knock it off. The correspondence from November 2017 is between the German-born pontiff and Cardinal Walter Brandmüller, a According to the New York Times, Benedict allegedly says the pain caused by the end of his papacy has turned into anger, and it is impacting him and his papacy as a whole. The Vatican declines to confirm or deny the authenticity of the letter. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register, joins us. Ed, we don't often get a chance to know what Pope Benedict thinks. What is his message to Cardinal Brandmüller in these letters?
Yes, it's quite interesting, Lauren. This is the first time that we've really heard that he's, first of all, aware of the pain that people have felt about his resignation. He acknowledges that, but also he talks about the anger of the resignation feeding into an anger directed at him and his pontificate. And he says it's melted into the sorrow that people feel about the current situation in the church, which is also something we didn't know before.
Tell us about Cardinal Brandmüller and his concerns about Benedict's resignation.
Yes, well, this relates to an interview he gave back in October last year with the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, which is a big German newspaper, and he talked about his reservations, really, for the title Pope Emeritus. He said that's never been used in history at all. Cardinal Brandmüller is a very highly regarded church historian, and he said this has never been used before, and he really took issue with that. But also he spoke about his the concerns that cardinals had about his resignation. He said it knocked them sideways, and not only them, he said others as well.
Well, Cardinal Brandmüller is one of a few of the cardinals who have presented their questions, or what's being called the dubia, to the Pope about his document, The Joy of Love, or Amoris Laetitia. What are the concerns, and is Benedict telling him to knock it off, as the New York Times reports?
I don't know about that. That was rather a stretch, I think, from the New York Times. I don't think he's really saying that. I think he's saying really he's not very happy about the criticism of his resignation. I think he thinks that's unjustified. He feels very sure that he did the right thing, but that isn't. I think for Cardinal Brandmüller is reflecting in some ways some of the concerns that other cardinals have had about this. As somebody pointed out, Benedict never consulted any cardinals about his resignation before he took the decision. So that's always been a little bit of a bone of contention, I think, among some in the college. But we don't really know generally what the general feeling is among the cardinals about this because they don't really speak about it very much.
Thank you so much for this report. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register.
Thank you, Lauren.
A lot more ahead on EWTN News Nightly. Coming up, a report on terrorism in the world. Plus, North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un says he has a message for President Trump. The State Department says terrorism around the world is on the decline. Their new report claims the U.S. and its allies are making strides in the fight against ISIS and al-Qaeda. But officials warn both organizations and the countries harboring them are still a significant threat. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby has more from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Terrorism experts here say the total number of terror attacks worldwide in 2017 was down almost 25%. The State Department says the main reason is driving ISIS out of Iraq. State Department officials say terrorist groups are adjusting to the loss of physical territory in the Middle East. According to an annual report on terrorism, militant groups are going into hiding. They're carrying out more and more clandestine attacks. Peter Brooks, a national security expert, says the U.S. and its allies have to remain vigilant.
ISIS is scattering. They may go to other parts of the world. We see it as far away as Southeast Asia in the Philippines. ISIS has a presence in Afghanistan.
And in those countries, Brooks says the terrorists remain resilient and determined. The report also calls Iran the leading state sponsor of terrorism, with a near global reach.
Iran supports terrorist groups such as Hezbollah, Hamas. They've had a very shady relationship with al-Qaeda as well.
The Iranian mission to the United Nations is denying those claims and accusing the United States of destabilizing the region. The Trump administration, including UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, have taken an increasingly tough stance on Iran since President Trump withdrew from the 2015 nuclear deal in May. The president is likely to talk about Iran's support of terrorism and the regime's nuclear ambitions next week during his speech at the UN General Assembly in New York. The president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, has not confirmed if he will attend the UN General Assembly next week. Some reports say President Trump might be willing to meet with him, but others in the administration don't think he should. I will be in New York City to cover the president's speech and his chairing a Security Council meeting. Be sure to watch our coverage right here on EWTN News Nightly, Monday through Wednesday. We'll also talking about how the Catholic Church is helping tackle the biggest global challenges. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. President Moon Jae-in of South Korea says Kim Jong-un gave him a private message for President Trump. Moon says he will deliver the message next week when he sees President Trump at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. The president also reports Pyongyang wants U.S. officials to visit soon for nuclear talks. Plenty more on our show. Up next, controversy on a U.S. campus over one of the church's newest saints. Plus, why thousands of Hispanic Catholics are headed to Texas this weekend. A U.S. judge will consider suspending a new Idaho abortion law in the next few weeks. The law requires doctors report personal information of women who had, quote, complications. Providers will not have to include a patient's name, social security number, or other common identifiers. Lawyers for pro-abortion groups say the law is unconstitutional. Stanford University is dropping the name of St. Junipero Serra from its mailing address and 2 buildings. The school's pedestrian mall, shown here, bears the 18th century Spanish priest's name. He founded 9 missions up and down the coast of California. Now, the university is making the change to some named buildings because it says, quote, Serra contributed to the destruction of the cultural, economic, and religious practices of indigenous communities. Joining me now is Stanford alum and writer Charlotte Allen. Charlotte, welcome to the program.
Oh, I'm glad to be here, Lauren.
Why is it important to you that his name remain intact?
Well, there are a whole bunch of reasons. I'm a Stanford alumna, and Stanford was founded by people, the Leland Stanford and his wife Jane, who revered Junipero Serra. They regarded him as one of the founders of California, which in fact he was. The 9 missions form the backbone of the state, and as well as the other missions founded by other Franciscan fathers. So that's one reason. It ignores the founders' wishes.
But
Secondly,
you also think it's political correctness run amok? Am I correct?
That's the case. I think that what's happened is that the university has capitulated to campus activists, Native Americans and others, who basically come at the whole thing from your basic campus leftist radical perspective. Everything done by the Catholic Church, by white people, including the white people of Spain who settled California, is bad. And any grievance, real or imaginary, by Native Americans is good. And so Serra has been painted by them in the worst possible lights as virtually a slaveholder. All
right, let's look at this report that was submitted in August by the Advisory Committee on renaming Junipero Serra, however his name is correctly pronounced. I think I have it wrong. But these Catholic students for this report say they feel disappointment but not anger at the loss of the saint's name. In your opinion, for communities and universities across the nation as they wrestle with what can be painful historic legacies, what's the right way to balance preservation of history with today's standards of diversity and inclusion?
Well, I think for one thing, it might be good to have some conversations about this. Instead of simply proceeding forward. This has been going on for several years, since 2016, when students voted to change the name and the faculty joined in. So what we're talking about essentially is something that has bypassed a stage in which Native Americans and Catholics might sit down and talk to each other and get familiar with each other's positions. And so I think that there can be ways of honoring Californians' Native American heritage and the people who claim descent from those people without vilifying the name of somebody who's so important to California history, but is also now a Catholic saint. And there seems to be no what is the word, regard for that, for the fact that the church has essentially declared him to be a holy man.
But Stanford is not a Catholic university. It is a private university. And while the wishes of the founders, as you say, were that his name be associated with it, does that mean that his name has to continue throughout history?
Well, I don't quite understand why not. I mean, at Harvard University, for example, if you look at the Puritans who founded Harvard, they had all sorts of religious intolerance, much intolerance toward the Indians of Massachusetts, for example. But there seems to be no claim that there be this wholesale kind of change of name over there. So what is the problem now at Stanford? And we're talking about, a couple of buildings, and perhaps I could see a dormitory's name being changed if students really don't want to live in a dormitory named after Junipero Serra, maybe because they're Protestants, for one thing.
Or Indian.
American
Native
Indians, right.
American Indians.
So,
right.
okay, but changing the name of Sarah Mall, which was so important to the founders and to Stanford's identity. I mean, it looks like a California mission.
Okay, thank you so much, Charlotte Allen, for coming in and joining us, a writer and a Stanford alum. Finally, tonight, around 3,000 Hispanic Catholics are attending a conference this weekend outside of Dallas. It's part of an initiative to strengthen ties between them and the U.S. Church.
For the Church of the United States, not only do we see the leadership of our beautiful, diverse Hispanic community, but we see a leadership for the entire church.
The event is sponsored by the U.S. Catholic Bishops' Conference. 50% of American Catholics ages 14 to 29 are Hispanic. That does it for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night and God bless you.